She trusted her father with her name. He used it to hide crimes. And the only way to survive was to expose him live. The penthouse was a cathedral of curated wealth, a space where luxury whispered instead of shouted. Marble floors gleamed under the soft golden light, and glass railings framed a panoramic view of the city, its millions of lights flickering like stars trapped in concrete and steel. Abstract sculptures stood in calculated isolation, like sentinels observing the human dramas unfolding beneath them. Soft jazz drifted through the air, carrying the faint scent of expensive perfume and polished wood. Paul adjusted his jacket, scanning the room not with awe, but with methodical attention. Every smile, every handshake, every laugh was a piece of a puzzle he was trained to notice. He wasn't here to mingle. He was here to observe, to analyze, and to collect the first strands of a story that promised to be explosive. His eyes moved carefully over the crowd. There were people who laughed too loudly, people who avoided certain glances, people whose hands twitched toward concealed phones or discreet documents. Every detail mattered. Somewhere in this glittering maze of ambition, influence, and quiet manipulation, the story he sought was already taking shape, disguised as charm, sophistication, and philanthropy. And then he saw her, Alexandra. She was standing near the balcony, a slender figure poised with effortless grace. In one hand, a delicate glass of wine, and in the other, the intangible force of someone who believed wholeheartedly in what they were doing. She spoke animatedly to a small group of attendees, her voice carrying a mix of warmth and conviction that made even the most distracted listener pause. Her smile was genuine, her laughter unforced, and the clarity of her words drew attention without demanding it. She wasn't performing for the crowd. She was advocating for a cause she truly believed in. Paul approached cautiously, as one might approach a rare and delicate artifact, intrigued, respectful, yet aware that one wrong move could shatter the illusion. "Quite the turnout tonight," he said, nodding toward the mingling crowd. Alexandra turned, and the expression on her face was immediate and open. Her eyes met his with an honesty that disarmed and intrigued simultaneously. "Yes," she said, her voice steady and confident. "It's always a mixture of longtime supporters and new faces. We want everyone to feel part of the mission." Paul's gaze didn't waver. "And that mission, it's completely transparent? No shadows, no hidden agendas." She laughed lightly, a sound that seemed to fill the space around her. "Absolutely. Every donation, every program, meticulously documented. People trust us to make a real difference. And trust isn't something we ever take for granted." He allowed himself a small, approving smile. Her sincerity was almost unsettling. In a room full of people who measured value in influence, favor, or prestige, she radiated authenticity. Yet his instincts warned him, appearances could be weaponized as easily as lies. He cataloged her words, not to admire, but to later verify against the truth he intended to uncover. From across the room, Sterling moved with the precision of a man who had spent decades orchestrating appearances and influence. His charisma was palpable, his charm carefully calculated. Every handshake was measured, every smile deliberate. Paul noted the tension in contrast, Alexandra's genuine warmth against Sterling's calculated magnetism. The juxtaposition alone hinted at a story, though the depth of it remained hidden. Paul lingered near the balcony, watching Alexandra interact with her guests. Her gestures were open, patient, yet confident. Each response to probing questions was delivered with clarity and intelligence. She inspired belief, not by performance, but by conviction. And still, beneath that brightness, Paul sensed unacknowledged pressures, the subtle weight of legacy, wealth, and expectation pressing against her from directions she hadn't yet recognized. As speeches began and the room turned its attention to the mayor's stage charm, Paul retreated to the balcony. The night air was a sharp contrast to the warm, controlled chaos inside. He gazed down at the city, each light a reminder of the stakes at play, power, influence, and secrets buried beneath the glitter. He returned his attention to Alexandra. She laughed, she gestured, she believed. And he realized something crucial. Her trust, her sincerity, her openness. In the wrong hands, she could be manipulated. In the right hands, she could change everything. Paul's mind raced, calculating, predicting. Every move in this room had consequences. Every interaction could tip the balance between exposure and survival. And somewhere between the champagne, the jazz, and the soft murmurs of the guests, a collision had already begun, a collision that would draw him and Alexandra together, whether they were ready or not. By the time he took a quiet step back and allowed the room to envelop him again, he knew that this was not merely an assignment. It was the start of a story that would demand everything: cunning, patience, and a willingness to confront the shadows behind even the brightest smiles. And Alexandra, brilliant, sincere, and unknowingly caught in a web she could not yet see, was at the center of it all. Paul returned to his small apartment later that evening, the city lights stretching beneath him like a map of possibilities and dangers. The penthouse, Alexandra's sincerity, Sterling's subtle manipulations, they all swirled in his mind. He opened his laptop, sifting through the documents he had managed to gather discreetly over the past weeks, and began comparing them to the bank transfers and foundation records he had obtained through his sources. At first glance, everything seemed orderly. Donations tallied, expenditures categorized, programs accounted for. But then his eyes caught an anomaly: a series of transfers moving through shell companies and offshore accounts, all traced back to the foundation. And most alarming, the signatures authorizing the transfers bore Alexandra's unmistakable mark. Paul leaned back, heart pounding. The implications were immediate, profound. Had Alexandra, the very woman whose conviction and sincerity had drawn him in, been complicit? Or had she been manipulated into authorizing these transactions without realizing their true purpose? The more he studied the documents, the more the pieces seemed to point in conflicting directions, and the deeper the unease grew. Meanwhile, across town, Alexandra was wrapping up her own day. She had returned home, still humming softly to herself after the evening's speeches, unaware of the storm about to hit. Her phone buzzed with a notification, a message from her accountant confirming that everything had been reconciled. She smiled, thinking her mission was intact, her efforts validated. Paul's first call to her came shortly after midnight. "Alexandra," he began cautiously, keeping his tone neutral, "I've been reviewing the foundation's financials. There are irregularities." Her response was instant, measured, and calm. "Irregularities?" she echoed, brow furrowing slightly. "Can you be more specific?" "I have records of transfers moving through offshore accounts," Paul said. "They're authorized with your signature." There was a pause on the other end, and Paul could almost hear her heart rate quicken through the silence. When she spoke, it was firm, almost disbelieving. "That's impossible. I've only ever signed what was necessary for procurement, clean sheets, approvals for urgent shipments of medication. Everything else is handled by the board." Paul's mind raced. She sounded sincere, almost defensive, but he had learned to trust the evidence over appearances. "These documents match your handwriting. The transfers are real. They've been moving funds overseas for months." "I swear, I didn't know," she said softly, the conviction in her voice carrying the weight of fear and confusion. "If someone has used my signature without my knowledge, I would never condone this. This is why I fight for transparency." Paul exhaled, leaning forward in his chair. The room felt suddenly smaller, charged with tension. "Then someone is framing you, Alexandra. And whoever it is, they're good. Extremely good." On the other side of the line, Alexandra's mind raced. She had trusted her family, trusted her father's guidance, and now she realized that blind trust might have been her undoing. The thought that Sterling, the man she had known all her life, could manipulate her so completely made her stomach twist. Paul continued carefully. "We need to verify every step, every signature, every transaction. We need to find out who is behind this before it's too late." Her voice hardened. "Then we do it. Together." They spent the next hour on the phone, cross-referencing dates, amounts, and accounts. The initial panic gave way to determination. Despite the shock, despite the sense of betrayal, Alexandra refused to retreat. She would fight, not just to clear her name, but to stop whoever was using her as a pawn. Paul knew the stakes were rising. If Sterling learned that she and Alexandra were communicating, that they were coordinating, the consequences could be deadly. Surveillance, threats, even legal maneuvers. He had no doubt that Sterling had both the means and the willingness to escalate. And yet, despite the danger, a fragile alliance was forming. The initial spark of trust that had flickered in the penthouse now gained substance. Pohl's careful observation, Alexandra's unshakable belief in her mission, and the stark reality of the evidence all converged into one undeniable conclusion. They were facing a formidable adversary, and alone, neither of them stood a chance. By the time they ended the call, both were silent, each lost in thought. Pohl stared at the city lights, feeling the weight of responsibility pressing down. Alexandra sat at her desk, gripping the edge tightly, a mixture of fear and resolve coursing through her. The stage was set, and the game had begun. Somewhere out there, Sterling and his enforcer, Donald, were already watching, already calculating, already preparing to strike. And neither Alexandra nor Pohl could afford a single misstep. The first shock of betrayal had landed, and it would only get worse. The next morning, Pohl arrived at Alexandra's apartment with a mixture of determination and caution. He carried the stack of original documents he had painstakingly cross-referenced the previous night. His mind was a tangle of suspicion and strategy. He had to confront her without pushing her away, without giving Sterling or Donald any indication that they were onto something. Alexandra opened the door before he could even knock. Her hair was pulled back in a loose bun, her eyes still carrying the faint traces of yesterday's excitement and today's worry. She gestured for him to come in. Pohl placed the documents on her coffee table with deliberate care. "I need you to look at these," he said quietly. She leaned forward, fingers brushing the papers as her eyes scanned the lines of text, the signatures, the official stamps. When she recognized her own handwriting, a cold shiver ran down her spine. "These are mine," she whispered, voice catching slightly. "I signed them, but these weren't the forms I thought I was signing." Pohl nodded, careful to meet her gaze. "Exactly. You remember the blank sheets you signed for urgent procurement? They were used to cover these transfers. Someone attached real transactions to your signatures without your knowledge." A wave of realization washed over her. Pain, anger, disbelief, all intertwined. She pressed her hands to her face for a moment, then straightened, the sharpness in her eyes returning. "It's my family. My father's people. I was the unwitting shield. The scapegoat." Pohl's expression hardened. "And they've been using you as one for months. Sterling has been moving money, laundering it under your approval, knowing you wouldn't question the blank forms." Alexandra's lips pressed into a thin line. I can't believe he would do this. He's my father. I trusted him." Her voice broke slightly, the betrayal hitting deeper than any financial discrepancy could. "I thought everything I was doing mattered. I thought I was helping people." "You are helping people," Pohl said firmly. "And now, together, we can make sure this stops. But we have to act carefully. He's powerful, and he has people watching every move." Her fingers trembled slightly as she opened her laptop, accessing the family server she had long believed was merely for internal Foundation documents. Carefully, she navigated encrypted folders and firewalls, revealing a trail of manipulated files and falsified reports. "Look," she said, pointing at a series of dated logs. "They've been attaching my approvals to these transactions. Every single one is fabricated, yet it all points back to me." Pohl studied the screen, eyes narrowing. "This is more than manipulation. This is orchestration. Sterling built an entire system to use you as a legal shield. And Donald," he paused, lowering his voice, "he's probably monitoring everything we're doing right now." Alexandra's jaw tightened. "Then we have to move fast. We can't wait for him to realize what we've uncovered. If we stay passive, they'll bury the evidence and make sure we take the fall." Pohl nodded, impressed by her resolve despite the emotional toll. "We'll need to recover the original documents, track every transaction, and document everything in a way that even Sterling can't deny. And we'll have to be extremely careful. Donald won't hesitate to neutralize anyone who gets too close." Alexandra exhaled, a shudder running through her. It's frightening. But I can't turn back now. Not after knowing the truth." Pohl's gaze softened. "Neither can I. We're in this together. And if we plan this right, we can expose everything. Sterling, the transfers, the lies, and make sure you're cleared in the process." For the first time in hours, a flicker of hope appeared in her eyes. "Then let's do it," she said, her voice steady despite the turmoil. "We find the truth, and we make him accountable." Pohl placed a hand lightly on the documents, as if anchoring their partnership. "We start tonight," he said. Every step has to be precise. One mistake, and we risk everything. Your reputation, my safety, and the chance to stop him before he destroys more lives. Alexandra nodded, resolve hardening her features. She had believed she was acting for good all along, but now she understood the full extent of her father's betrayal. The same trust that had guided her so far now became the foundation for a hidden alliance, one built on necessity, strategy, and the shared goal of justice. As they worked late into the night, cross-referencing documents, tracing signatures, and piecing together the network of deception, the bond between them solidified. Fear and betrayal had brought them together, but trust, careful, deliberate, and unspoken, would carry them through the dangers still to come. Outside, the city pulsed with indifferent life, unaware that two people, once isolated and vulnerable, were quietly preparing to challenge one of its most powerful figures. Sterling may have controlled the boardrooms and offices, the whispers and the ledgers, but he had underestimated Alexandra and Paul, and the reckoning was only just beginning. The night had settled over the city, the streets glowing dimly beneath streetlights, when Alexandra and Paul slipped into a small, secluded co-working space she had used in the past for confidential foundation projects. The room smelled faintly of coffee and old books, a comforting contrast to the gleaming, suffocating opulence of her father's penthouse. Here, they could think, plan, and act without the invisible eyes of Sterling and Donald watching every step. Paul spread the documents across a long table, his finger tracing lines of transactions and attachments. "Look at this," he said, pointing to a cluster of files. "Every approval you supposedly signed, it's attached to real transfers, but if we compare it with the clean sheets you authorized, it's clear they've been retrofitted. Someone has been building a paper trail that frames you perfectly." Alexandra leaned over, her brow furrowing as she studied the digital trail. "This is beyond anything I imagined. My father's team, my own family, using me as a legal shield. And for what? Political gain? Money laundering? Both." Her hands trembled slightly, but her eyes shone with determination. "We have to expose this. We have to prove I was a pawn, not a perpetrator." Paul nodded. "Agreed. But we have to be meticulous. Donald's probably monitoring us already, so every move must be discreet. We'll need access to the internal server. If we can trace the falsified approvals and create a timeline, we can connect Sterling directly to the manipulations." Alexandra swallowed, taking a steadying breath. "I can get us in. There's a backdoor to the family server. It was meant for emergencies, for urgent access to foundation programs. I'll have to act like I'm following my father's orders, but I can isolate the files we need." Paul's lips pressed into a thin line. "It's risky. If Sterling notices anything unusual, he'll know someone is probing deeper. Donald won't hesitate." She met his gaze, resolve firm. "I'm ready. I have to be. We have to be smart, but we can't wait for him to make the first move." They worked in silence for a few moments, the hum of the computers filling the room, punctuated by the occasional click of a mouse or the faint tap of keys. Paul guided her through encryption protocols, teaching her subtle ways to extract and verify the data without leaving traces. Alexandra's fingers flew over the keyboard with precision, her earlier fear giving way to focus and determination. Finally, she leaned back, her eyes scanning the screen. "Got it," she whispered. "All the falsified approvals, the retrofitted transfers, everything they tried to pin on me. It's all here." Paul allowed himself a small smile, the first in hours. "Good work. Now we have evidence. Concrete, undeniable evidence. But we have to move carefully. One misstep, and Sterling could destroy everything we've uncovered." Alexandra exhaled, a mix of relief and lingering tension. "I can't believe I trusted him, my own father. But now I see. He built a perfect trap, and we almost fell into it." Paul leaned forward, voice low but firm. "We didn't fall in. Not yet. And together, we can make sure we never do. The only way to survive this, and protect your name, is to act as a team. Every move, every plan, every precaution has to be coordinated." She nodded, the weight of betrayal mingling with the adrenaline of purpose. "Then we are a team. From now on, it's you and me." The city outside moved on, oblivious to the quiet revolution taking place in that small co-working space. Here, two people who had begun as strangers, A journalist and a woman caught in the crossfire of her father's ambition were now united by necessity and strategy. Fear, betrayal, and urgency had forged an alliance stronger than either had anticipated. Pole glanced at Alexandra, noting the fierce determination in her eyes. "The next step," he said, "is to track every falsified document, every manipulated approval. We build a chain of evidence so strong that neither Sterling nor Donald can deny it." Alexandra nodded. "And we stay invisible while doing it. One misstep, and everything collapses." Pole leaned back, the faintest trace of a smile crossing his face. "Invisible, precise, unstoppable. That's how we win." They turned back to the screens, fingers moving with synchronized purpose. Outside, the city's lights glimmered like distant stars, unaware that a secret alliance had formed, one that would challenge power, expose betrayal, and confront a man who had underestimated both of them. And for the first time in days, Alexandra allowed herself a flicker of hope, not naive, but sharp, deliberate, and fueled by the certainty that, together, they could outmaneuver the storm ahead. A few days later, Pole sat alone in his small apartment, the glow of his laptop screen reflecting off the cluttered walls. He had been meticulously cross-checking every file Alexandra had retrieved from the family server, creating timelines, comparing transfers, and noting inconsistencies. And then he noticed something, a line of communication he hadn't expected. A message popped up on Alexandra's secure device. "Thank you for yesterday. It changed the course of the game." Pole froze. The tone was innocuous, almost casual, but his instincts screamed that this was deliberate. He reread the message, scrutinized the metadata, and felt a cold knot of doubt tighten in his chest. Who was this from? Alexandra? Or was it someone planting seeds of confusion? He leaned back, running a hand over his face. His mind raced through possibilities. Could Alexandra be using him? Was there a chance she was secretly collaborating with Sterling, perhaps even unknowingly, as part of the same manipulative system that had framed her? The thought made his stomach churn. He had trusted her, relied on her precision, and now a flicker of paranoia clouded his judgment. Meanwhile, Alexandra was across town, sitting at her desk, unaware of Pole's growing doubts. She was reviewing the audit logs again, tracing each signature, each timestamp. She was focused, determined, and yet a creeping fear gnawed at the edge of her resolve. Pole was her only ally, but the subtle reminder of betrayal from her own family left her hyper-aware of every interaction. Every message, every glance, every delay in response could be a trap. Pole called her cautiously, his voice calm, almost measured, masking the undercurrent of tension. "Alexandra, we need to talk about something I just found." Her brow furrowed. "What is it?" He hesitated for a moment, then explained the message he had seen. "There's a note on your device. It's ambiguous. It could be nothing, but I can't shake the feeling it's deliberate. It could be Sterling or Donald, trying to seed doubt, to make me question you." Alexandra stiffened, her mind racing. "I didn't send anything like that," she said firmly. "You have to trust me. I'm not playing games with you. I want the truth as much as you do." Pole's eyes narrowed, his mind struggling to separate intuition from fact. "I want to trust you, but I have to be honest. My instincts are screaming that someone is trying to manipulate the situation, to drive a wedge between us before we can act. We can't let them succeed." She nodded slowly, her hands gripping the edge of the desk. "Then we double-check everything. No assumptions. Every document, every signature, every communication, we verify it ourselves. We can't let them use doubt against us." Pole exhaled, a fraction of the tension easing. "Good. That's the only way. But be careful. They're watching. Donald doesn't miss a thing. If Sterling notices even a hint that we're coordinating, the next move could be dangerous." A silence fell between them, filled only by the faint hum of the city outside and the low click of keys as Alexandra began rechecking her logs. Both of them were acutely aware of the stakes. Paranoia was no longer just a feeling. It was a tool being wielded against them. And as they worked, Pole's suspicions lingered like a shadow over every interaction. For the first time, he realized that the greatest threat wasn't just Sterling's power or Donald's vigilance. It was the uncertainty, the doubt, the subtle psychological traps designed to fracture alliances before they could act. Alexandra's resolve, though strong, was tempered by fear. Pole's trust, though real, was shadowed by suspicion. And in the quiet moments between data points and secure messages, both understood that the battle they faced was as much about perception and loyalty as it was about evidence and strategy. By nightfall, Pohl leaned back in his chair, rubbing his temples. He knew that Sterling was clever, manipulative, and ruthless, but he also knew that Alexandra's insight and courage, combined with his investigative skills, gave them a chance. A fragile, tense, uncertain chance. And as they prepared for the next steps, both understood that one misjudgment, one misplaced doubt, could turn allies into enemies and expose them to the full wrath of a man who had built a world of lies around the person they both sought to protect. The game was escalating, and the first seeds of distrust had been planted, a psychological trap that could make or break everything. The night air was thick with tension as Pohl hid in the shadows near the edge of Alexandra's neighborhood, his body pressed against the wall of a dimly lit alley. The attack had come without warning, a sudden ambush on his way from a secure meeting with a whistleblower. His jacket was torn, a shallow cut on his forearm, and his chest still heaved from the adrenaline. Donald's reach was closer than they had anticipated, and the reality of the danger settled over him like a weight he could not shrug off. Inside her apartment, Alexandra sat rigid at her desk, her fingers trembling over the keyboard. She had known that Sterling's network of surveillance was extensive, but seeing Pohl disappear into that sudden, violent trap made the threat terrifyingly real. Her mind raced, every contingency, every escape route, every possible defensive move. But the fear wasn't paralyzing, it sharpened her focus. She had to act, and she had to act carefully. She logged into the family server, ostensibly as if she were following her father's instructions, her every move carefully orchestrated to appear compliant. Each keystroke was measured, calculated, a performance of submission hiding the reality of her true intent. She was playing the obedient daughter while simultaneously creating a map of Sterling's control, surveillance points, security protocols, document archives, and key personnel. Pohl's voice was steady over the encrypted line, though the strain of the attack still echoed in his tone. Alexandra, you have to be careful. Don't trigger anything that could make Donald act faster than we anticipate. I know, she whispered, though her voice carried an edge of determination. I'll get us the access we need. But it's getting harder to stay invisible. He exhaled sharply. Every move counts now. One mistake, one anomaly, and they'll know we're inside. Donald won't hesitate. He'll escalate immediately. And Sterling. He paused, letting the weight of the implication settle. Sterling has built an empire on fear and obedience. He won't tolerate disobedience. Alexandra swallowed, pressing her lips into a thin line. Then I'll act like I'm obedient. I'll perform the part he expects while I secure the files we need. He thinks I'm under control. That's our advantage. Hours passed in tense silence. Alexandra's fingers moved with precision, navigating encrypted layers and tracing the digital breadcrumbs left by Sterling's team. Each folder opened, each file copied, each log examined brought her closer to the evidence they needed to expose the truth. And yet, each successful maneuver also carried the knowledge that one misstep could cost not just their mission, but their lives. Pohl monitored her movements from a safe distance, his own heart racing. Despite his training and experience, fear gnawed at him. Fear for Alexandra, fear for the fragile alliance they had forged, fear for the explosive consequences that awaited any slip. He knew Sterling would not hesitate to exploit weakness, to manufacture accidents, or to eliminate obstacles altogether. Finally, Alexandra leaned back, her expression a mixture of relief and exhaustion. I've got it, she said quietly. All the critical access points. All the evidence tied to the falsified documents. Now it's just a matter of moving carefully and fast. Pohl nodded, his jaw tight. Good. But we can't celebrate yet. They'll be watching, and Donald will already be trying to anticipate our next steps. We have to stay ahead, invisible and precise. A long silence stretched between them. The magnitude of what they were undertaking, challenging a powerful, calculating man and his enforcer, was overwhelming. And yet, neither could back down now. This is the point of no return, Alexandra said softly, her voice barely audible over the hum of the computers. Once we use this access, there's no going back. We're fully committed, for our safety, for the truth, for everyone Sterling has manipulated. Pole's hand rested lightly on the edge of the desk, a silent reassurance. We knew that when we started, and we can handle it. Together. Outside, the city pulsed with indifferent life. Inside, two people, a journalist and a woman caught in the shadow of her father's ambition, were fully committed to exposing a conspiracy that had been years in the making. Fear and danger pressed in from every side, but resolve hardened into focus. Every decision, every action, every carefully measured move would determine not just their success, but their survival. And for the first time since the nightmare began, Alexandra felt a sense of clarity amidst the fear. The only way forward was to confront the system from within, to act boldly under observation, and to outmaneuver the very forces that had been trying to control her since birth. The game had escalated. The trap had been sprung. And now, there was no turning back. The morning of Sterling's Senate announcement arrived with a city shrouded in fog, the kind that muted sound and softened light, giving the streets an eerie stillness. Pole and Alexandra arrived early, blending with the crowd under the guise of ordinary supporters, though their minds were focused entirely on what was about to unfold. The live broadcast would be watched by millions, making it the perfect stage for Sterling's show of power and the perfect opportunity for them to act. Alexandra's hands trembled slightly as she adjusted the strap of her handbag, inside of which lay the original contract with Sterling's fingerprints. Every inch of her body radiated tension, but her expression remained composed, as though she were merely another face in the audience. Pole leaned close, whispering, "Remember, calm, precise. One false move and Donald will be on you before you even realize it." She nodded, swallowing the lump in her throat. "I can do this. For the truth. For everyone he's used, everyone he's manipulated. No more hiding." The crowd began to murmur as Sterling appeared on stage, flanked by his carefully orchestrated entourage. Cameras captured his every gesture, the polished smile, the charismatic wave, the confident tone as he addressed the gathering. Alexandra felt a shiver run down her spine. This man had wielded influence and fear for decades, and now, every second was a delicate balance between his control and their subversion. As Sterling spoke about integrity, progress, and civic responsibility, Alexandra moved subtly, positioning herself where Pole could access her quickly if needed. She felt the weight of the original contract pressing against her side, its significance almost unbearable. This document was the culmination of weeks of investigation, proof of everything Sterling had tried to conceal, evidence that could bring down a political empire in minutes. Pole's eyes scanned the room, noting the tension in Sterling's aides, the almost imperceptible movements of security personnel, and the cameras that captured every angle of the event. He whispered, "Wait for the right moment. Timing is everything." Pole adjusted his earpiece, a subtle nod to a contact in the tech booth. He had spent the previous night ensuring that once Alexandra started speaking, the master override for the hall's audio wouldn't respond to the mayor's staff. They didn't just have the truth, they had the frequency. Then, as Sterling reached the crescendo of his speech, praising his family's dedication and the foundation's noble work, Alexandra stepped forward, moving with the confidence of someone who had nothing left to hide. The crowd parted slightly, the cameras pivoted, and for a brief, electrifying moment, all eyes were on her. With deliberate precision, she extended the folder toward Paul. He caught it effortlessly, fingers brushing against hers for an instant, a silent affirmation of trust and partnership. She opened her mouth, speaking into the live microphone that Sterling hadn't noticed she had positioned herself near. "This man," she said, voice steady, cutting through the fog of staged adoration, "has used my name, my authority, and my family's trust to commit crimes hidden from public view. Here are the original documents, with his fingerprints, proof of falsified approvals, illegal transfers, and manipulation." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Cameras swiveled toward her, broadcasting the revelation live to millions. Sterling's face turned from confident charm to disbelief, then fury. Donald lunged toward her, his movements a blur of practiced, lethal efficiency. He didn't shout. He moved with the silence of a predator. Pole anticipated the strike, throwing himself into Donald's path not with a punch, but with a desperate tackle that sent them both crashing into the heavy oak podium. For a terrifying second, Pole felt the sheer force of the man's strength, and saw him reaching for something metallic tucked beneath his blazer. But the disruption was enough. Before Donald could recover, two plainclothes federal agents, who had been waiting for the signal pole planted, slammed him against the marble floor. Pole scrambled up, heart hammering against his ribs, catching a glimpse of the cold, dead fury in Donald's eyes. It was the look of a man who didn't lose, and Pole knew that from this moment on, he would never be able to walk a dark street without looking back. The crowd erupted into murmurs and whispers. Security personnel hesitated, unsure how to respond to someone speaking the truth live on national television. Alexandra's voice did not waver. She detailed the falsified approvals, the offshore transfers, the manipulations that had used her as a pawn. Each revelation was precise, undeniable, and devastating. Pole stayed close, ready to react, documenting everything as it happened. He knew the importance of immediacy. Federal agents had already been alerted and were positioned nearby, prepared to intervene once the live broadcast confirmed the scope of Sterling's deception. Sterling's outrage was palpable, but he could not immediately counter the evidence now in the public domain. Donald, furious and powerless, retreated under Pole's watchful gaze. Alexandra continued, unwavering, until the final, undeniable point: Sterling's fingerprints on the contracts that had framed her. When she finished, silence enveloped the crowd. Pole exhaled slowly, tension draining from his body just enough to register the enormity of what they had accomplished. Cameras zoomed in on Sterling, now cornered, while federal agents moved in, ready to secure the evidence and begin arrests. Alexandra and Pole exchanged a brief glance, a mixture of exhaustion, triumph, and relief. In that moment, the alliance they had forged in secrecy and fear had become unbreakable. They had outmaneuvered a lifetime of manipulation, risked everything, and emerged victorious. Outside, the fog had lifted, the city bathed in pale morning light. Inside the event hall, the carefully constructed facade of power and control crumbled in real time, replaced by a raw, undeniable truth. And for Alexandra and Pole, the long, perilous journey toward justice had reached its first, monumental victory. The exhilaration of the live broadcast faded as Pole and Alexandra found themselves outside, tucked into the shadows of a nearby alleyway. The city's morning light felt harsher now, exposing every detail, every potential threat. Pole's chest heaved with adrenaline, but the reality of what they had done, and what it had cost, was settling in. He looked at Alexandra, noting the strain in her eyes, the tightness in her jaw. "Are you okay?" he asked quietly, careful not to break the fragile rhythm of vigilance they had maintained. She nodded, though her hands still shook slightly. "I'm okay. We did it. But there's no going back now. They'll retaliate." Her voice was calm, but there was an undercurrent of fear she could not entirely suppress. Pole's gaze hardened. Retaliation is inevitable. Sterling and Donald have influence, resources, and the arrogance of someone who believes they can control the aftermath. We need to stay ahead. They moved quickly, retracing their steps through back streets, avoiding the visible security forces that were now swarming the area around the event hall. Pole kept one hand on the folder containing the evidence, Alexandra's contract and fingerprints securely in his possession. Every step was deliberate, calculated, as though even a casual misstep could tip the balance. By mid-morning, they reached a small, discreet safe house that Pole had secured weeks earlier. Inside, the tension of the past hours finally gave way to a brief, uneasy calm. Alexandra sank into a chair, running a hand through her hair, while Pole set the documents carefully on a desk. He studied her for a long moment. "You know," he began slowly, "you just made the biggest sacrifice without even thinking about it. Sterling's empire is crumbling, but you've exposed yourself completely. They know you've taken action, and they'll try everything to retaliate. Lawsuits, public smears, even personal attacks." Alexandra's eyes met his, resolute yet tinged with exhaustion. "I know, but someone had to do it. I couldn't stay silent, knowing what he's done, not just to me, but to everyone he's manipulated. If that meant risking my reputation, my safety, even our freedom, then so be it." Pole's jaw tightened. "You just became untouchable in truth, but vulnerable in everything else. You've saved yourself in principle, but lost the comfort of your old life. And me? I've also stepped into the crosshairs. This isn't just about exposure anymore. It's about surviving the fallout. Alexandra nodded, the weight of their situation settling in her chest. We can handle it. We have to. The evidence is solid, undeniable. The federal agents will move quickly. Sterling and Donald may have influence, but they can't manipulate the law once the proof is out there. Pohl exhaled, the tension in his shoulders easing fractionally. Yes, the law, finally, is on our side. But this isn't victory yet. It's survival. And the cost is high. Careers, family, safety, the illusion of normalcy. We've sacrificed more than we imagined we would. They spent the next hours coordinating with the federal agents, providing copies of documents, timelines, and logs. Every detail had to be perfect, every explanation airtight. Pohl observed Alexandra as she explained each element with clarity and conviction, noting how her fear had transformed into a disciplined, strategic focus. By evening, the first wave of action had been completed. Sterling was detained, his office secured, and Donald's movements tracked for further legal action. The initial chaos of their retaliation had subsided, leaving a haunting quiet. The empire Sterling had built, the network of manipulation, had begun to unravel. Alexandra sank back into her chair, finally allowing herself a deep breath. "It's over," she said softly, though the tremor in her voice betrayed the truth. The danger was far from fully behind them. Pohl shook his head gently. "It's never truly over. But we did what we had to do. We survived, we exposed the truth, and we protected ourselves and others. That's more than most people can say." For a long moment, they sat in silence, letting the gravity of their sacrifice and the enormity of their achievement wash over them. They had risked everything: careers, safety, even the fragile trust between them. And yet, despite the fear, despite the cost, there was an undeniable sense of purpose and justice fulfilled. Outside, the city continued its indifferent rhythm, unaware of the quiet triumph and the personal costs exacted in a small, hidden safe house. Pohl and Alexandra, battered, wary, but unbroken, understood one thing clearly. The fight had taken its toll, but it had also forged an unshakable alliance, one that could face whatever fallout awaited with precision, courage, and unwavering resolve. By the following morning, the pieces of Sterling's empire were falling into place like a meticulously constructed puzzle being dismantled. Pohl and Alexandra sat side by side in the safe house, surrounded by screens, documents, and notes, a battlefield of paper and digital evidence that chronicled years of manipulation, deceit, and exploitation. "What's remarkable," Pohl said, scrolling through a chain of emails and internal memos, "is how coordinated it all was. Every falsified transaction, every manipulated approval, it wasn't random. Someone designed the system so that you, Alexandra, would appear guilty if anyone ever scrutinized it." Alexandra's face hardened. "I always suspected my father could be controlling, manipulative. But this was systemic. He and Donald didn't just rely on fear. They built an entire network to shield themselves and use me as the perfect legal shield." Pohl nodded. "And it wasn't just the money or the documents. Sterling orchestrated your entire public image, your career, even how people perceived your honesty. Every misstep, every achievement, every approval, it was all part of his narrative." Alexandra's hand trembled as she pulled up a folder detailing Sterling's personal communications with Donald over the past 5 years. "Look at this. Plans to discredit journalists, instructions to manipulate donors, timelines for falsified documents, all to maintain control over me and the foundation. They never expected me to discover the backdoor access." Pohl's eyes darkened as he leaned closer. "And they never anticipated that you'd have an ally who could spot the discrepancies, verify signatures, and expose the manipulation. Sterling underestimated both of us, and that's why we succeeded." A wave of cold fury swept over Alexandra. "He used me my entire life. Every decision, every opportunity. I was never acting for myself. I was acting in his shadow, a pawn in a game I didn't even know existed." Pohl reached across, placing a hand on hers. "You're not a pawn anymore. You're the one holding the proof, the one who controlled how the story unfolded. That's why the federal agents are moving in now. They verified everything. Sterling's web is collapsing. For a long moment, they sat in silence, letting the gravity of the revelation sink in. Then Alexandra exhaled sharply, a mix of relief and bitterness. It's ironic, isn't it? The people who tried to control me are now exposed by the very tools they used to manipulate me. Paul allowed a small, grim smile. Justice works in strange ways. Sterling and Donald built a fortress of deception, but they didn't anticipate truth being this persistent. The news began to filter in. Sterling's office had been raided, his personal files confiscated, and preliminary arrests had begun. Public records, once meticulously controlled, were now accessible to investigators. The scale of the conspiracy was staggering. Years of manipulation, money laundering, and political maneuvering, all orchestrated to use Alexandra as a shield and to maintain Sterling's power. Alexandra leaned back, exhaustion and resolve etched into her features. It's over, isn't it? For them, I mean. Paul shook his head slowly. For them, yes. The law will take care of the rest. And for us? We're still standing, still clear, but we'll have to rebuild. Our lives are different now, and they won't ever be the same as before. A quiet determination settled between them. They had uncovered the full extent of Sterling's deception, but the process had irrevocably changed everything. Alexandra's relationship with her family, the perception of her in the public eye, and the very foundation of trust in her life. This isn't just a victory, Alexandra said softly, her gaze distant. It's a reckoning. They manipulated everyone around me, but now it's them who are exposed. Paul nodded, a sense of quiet satisfaction undercut by the awareness of the challenges still ahead. And we made sure it's undeniable. Sterling and Donald have no way to spin this. The evidence is airtight. The story is out. You're cleared, officially, legally, but the emotional scars, the betrayals, those take longer to heal. Alexandra's lips pressed into a thin line. We'll heal, and we'll rebuild. We have to. But for now, we take a moment. Just a moment to acknowledge that we did it. That we survived the game, outsmarted them, and exposed the truth. Paul reached for the evidence folder, holding it carefully. And that's more than most people ever get to do. We changed the outcome, Alexandra. The law, the public, and history itself will remember this. Sterling and Donald are finished. Outside, the city buzzed with the usual rhythm of life, oblivious to the decades-long manipulation that had been quietly dismantled. Inside the safe house, Alexandra and Paul allowed themselves the first trace of relief, knowing they had not only survived but had rewritten the rules, turning years of deception into undeniable justice. The conspiracy had been fully unveiled, the manipulators held accountable, and the allies forged through danger and trust now stood ready to face whatever came next, together. The city felt different that morning. The tension that had lingered in every street, every office, and every public announcement was gone, replaced by a quiet calm that seemed almost surreal. Paul and Alexandra stepped out of the safe house, their movements measured, their minds finally unburdened from the constant calculation and fear that had defined the past weeks. Alexandra exhaled deeply, letting the crisp morning air fill her lungs. It's strange, she said softly, almost to herself. For the first time in years, I don't feel watched. I don't feel controlled. It's freedom. Paul smiled, though his eyes held the same vigilance that had kept them alive through so many close calls. Freedom doesn't erase the past, Alexandra, but it does give us a chance to start again, on our terms. They walked through the streets, unnoticed by the crowds that bustled with their usual indifference. The weight of Sterling's manipulation, the betrayal of family, and the looming threats of Donald's enforcements were gone. Sterling and Donald had been arrested. The federal agents had taken the evidence, securing it for prosecution. The public had begun to learn the truth, and Alexandra's name had been officially cleared. I've already made arrangements, Alexandra said, glancing at Paul with a tentative smile. The remaining funds from the foundation, they'll go to legitimate charitable causes. Hospitals, schools, and programs I actually believe in. I want to make sure the work is real this time, not a cover for someone else's schemes. Paul nodded approvingly. And we can finally focus on something for ourselves. Not just survival, not just justice, but building something meaningful on our own terms. They arrived at a small, sunlit cafe on the edge of the city, a place that seemed to exist out of time, untouched by politics, ambition, or manipulation. Sitting at a corner table, they allowed themselves a moment to relax, sipping coffee and letting the weight of the past weeks finally settle. Alexandra's eyes softened as she looked at Paul. I never imagined it would come to this. That we'd be standing here, alive, free, and together. After everything, it feels almost unreal. Paul reached across the table, brushing his hand over hers. It's real, and it's ours. We built this moment, Alexandra. Through risk, trust, and determination, we took control of our own story. She smiled, a genuine, unguarded smile that had been absent for far too long. Then let's make the next chapter worth it. No lies, no manipulation, no shadows. Just truth, and work we can be proud of. Paul leaned back, the sunlight catching his features. Agreed. We start from scratch, together. A small business, honest work, and no one to answer to but ourselves. It may not be glamorous, but it's ours, and that's what matters. They sat in comfortable silence, letting the world pass by, watching life unfold around them with a sense of calm they had almost forgotten existed. The city, oblivious to the chaos they had survived, seemed larger, kinder, and full of possibility. Alexandra's phone buzzed with updates from the federal agents. Sterling and Donald were officially in custody, their empire dismantled, and investigations continued to ensure no loose ends remained. The public scandal would be remembered for decades, but for Alexandra and Paul, the story had become theirs alone. Finally, Alexandra placed her hand on the folder that had once held their evidence. This was the past, she said softly. What matters now is what we do with the future. Paul nodded, a quiet determination settling over him. Then let's build it wisely. From scratch, but honestly. No shortcuts, no lies. Just us, and the life we choose to make. As they left the cafe, the sun broke fully through the morning fog, illuminating the streets, the buildings, and the possibilities that lay ahead. They walked side by side, free from fear, free from manipulation, and free to define their own destiny. The city around them moved on, unaware of the heroes who had quietly dismantled a web of corruption. The sunlight in the cafe was warm, but it couldn't quite reach the cold space Sterling had left in Alexandra's heart. She looked down at her hands. They had stopped shaking, but the weight of the last few days felt like a permanent shift in her DNA. She was no longer the Sterling heiress. She was the woman who broke the city's most powerful man. Across the table, Paul watched the door reflexively every time the bell chimed. His anonymity, the shadow he had lived in as a successful investigator, was shattered. Every news screen in the background flickered with their names, spinning a narrative they could no longer control. They were free, yes, but it was the kind of freedom that came after a shipwreck, grateful to be alive, but acutely aware of everything the tide had taken. As they reached for each other's hands, it wasn't just a romantic gesture. It was the only anchor they had left in a world that would never look at them the same way again. Paul and Alexandra, survivors of deceit and masters of their own fate, had not only uncovered the truth, but had claimed their lives back, stronger, wiser, and ready to face whatever came next, together. And for the first time in years, they felt a sense of calm certainty. Justice had been served, the past was behind them, and the future was theirs to shape. Thank you for listening to the story. Write your thoughts in the comments.